Hear that? Believe it or not, summer is just around the corner. Luckily, Armor All, America's most trusted auto appearance brand, has what your car needs to get that perfect summer shine. Plus, now through May 31st, we'll give you $5 for every $20 you spend on Armor All products. That means car wash pods, protectant, tire shine, you name it. Find out how to get your $5 rebate at armorall.com. Armor All, less work, more clean. Terms apply.
Welcome to the Single Tracks Podcast. I'm Leah Barber, and today I'm talking with Roxy Lo, bike designer for Ibis. We're going to see how she went from designing housewares at Pottery Barn to designing the Ibis Mojo, the Ripmo, and all the bikes in between. Word on the street was you were an industrial designer, right?
Yes.
Were you an industrial designer first or a mountain biker first?
Industrial designer first.
Oh, so give us a little bit of background into how you went from like industrial design into, well, you're the bike designer for Ibis. How the heck did that happen?
So I believe that from your industrial design background, you tend to work on process and different products. And so I spent most of my, out of school self-instruction, learning about products and how to make them. And so first was kind of like tech stuff. So anything from computer, like those old CRT block monitors.
Like that Apple computer that you had to pick up the whole thing.
But unfortunately I didn't get Apple. I was in some other brands. But then I got into housewares and at Pottery Barn, and then I got into more consulting with different brands and like understanding actual big companies and going in and helping them like qualify new ideas. So like we would do user research and ask people questions about like their habits in using products. And so one of them, for example, was a company came to us and they had this cool glass they wanted to try on like a charcoal grill. And they're like, we want to incorporate glass onto this charcoal grill because it's like a really cool glass and it's really durable. And we think it's going to be great. And okay, so we're like, well, we're going to hire some chefs across the country and across the world. So we found people in Italy, people in San Francisco, people in Boston, and we're like, cook for us on this prototype grill. And one part of the grill was like a grate, like a normal grate with gas. And the other side was this glass material. And people could almost stir fry on the glass because it was so hot. But if anyone used sugar, for example, it would actually pit the glass. And so we found that was happening because a lot of people are used to, slathering some kind of cool sauce on their meat or their vegetables. And then, they're trying to clean it. And what they end up doing is like chipping away at the glass when they're trying to pick up their food. So while it was a great idea, maybe it should have been steel. And so we were the bad news bears and said, this is not going to fly for you. So there are a lot of times when my job was just to help people say no and to understand that. So that was part of the process. And I guess my getting into bikes was not like a linear progression. It was just like, I just wanted to make everything.
Oh, that's really cool. I'm really like intrigued by your background because it sounds like the more products you had experience with or the more that you looked at, that kind of prepped you to where you are now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, having that skill set, being a designer, you just have that eye for knowing where there could be a problem and where there could be a solution,
Exactly.
I guess. So
yeah, it's quite rare because, I don't like to be a Debbie Downer. I like to look at the positive things. But in order to create a product that is safe and efficient and usable for the long term, you just have to like guess what the most obscure, weird thing that someone might do with it is. And this is a pretty cool place to do it in the bike space because people do all sorts of things.
People break stuff. People break bikes. You don't really want to be there when that happens. You don't want it to be you. Yeah. So
we ensure those things happen up front and they don't happen with the customer.
That's cool. Well, did you like ride bikes when you were a little kid or in college? Like, how did you get into mountain biking?
My first few recollections of bikes were, a banana seat, and like double riding
those
with friends.
Old school bikes.
Exactly. And, You know, there was when I was in college, I actually lived like 15 miles away from school, and I had to go through a tunnel, like an underwater tunnel to get to my college. And it was pretty horrible.
Did you say underwater? So you were
Yeah,
swimming?
I was
Just kidding.
Yeah, the tunnel was underwater because I lived on a little island that was a man-made island. And you had to actually go underwater for, I don't know, a quarter of a mile. But I realized that people would honk at you. And my handlebars were barely the size of the width of the walkway. And I was like trying my best to control the line. And I think that's like the scariest I've ever experienced bicycle riding, just to get to school.
That's
underneath a tunnel.
That's pretty crazy. Well, we have that problem with those like crazy 800 millimeter wide bars now in some sections of trail.
Yeah, I knocked my hands pretty good this morning.
Oh, jeez. Getting too close for comfort. And how did Ibis come into the picture? Did you just really like the brand and approach them?
So I had a couple friends that worked in Santa Cruz and at Santa Cruz Bicycles, and I was kind of like enamored with the whole scene. Like, it seemed like everyone rode all the time and had like a good life-work balance. And it was actually quite an interesting story because I wasn't really working at the time. I was just doing small side gigs. And what happened was Santa Cruz had, I think, acquired a clothing company called Swobo. And I just literally had no idea how to get into the bike industry. So I was actually like, well, if they need someone in apparel, maybe I can work my way into the bike industry if I go through apparel. Yeah. So never designed apparel before, but I was like, I think I have a sense of style, you know?
Sure you do.
Who knows? And so I just kind of made these drawings and I sent my resume into Santa Cruz Bikes and hadn't heard back from anyone in like weeks or months. And I was like, oh, okay, well, cold calls, you never know. Like, I understand if no one gets back to me. But one of the owners, Hans Heim, he had gotten bought out by the other partners in the company, and he saw my resume and he was like, I wonder what she's all about. Because he saw the rest of my work and he was like, oh, all over the map, right? With like all these different consulting gigs and bags and Pottery Barn. And okay, well, he saw something that he thought could be creative, and he tried me out as a graphic designer. He's like, do you want to try making a business card for a local shop? And I was like, I've never designed one of those things, so I'll figure it out. And made it happen, produced them. And then he was like, we worked well together. Like, do you feel like designing a bike?
From business card to a bike?
Yeah, and
cool.
I was like, no way. Like, you're totally joking, right? Like, I didn't know what things were called on a bike. I'm like,
there's wheels and all of that.
That's
stuff,
all I knew, though. I was like, what is the center part you spin your feet around, and the top part of the frame? Like, I had a cheat sheet. It was like a fake bike frame, and each one was like pointed to it and said top tube, down tube, head tube. Like, it was just so funny how much I've learned.
Yeah. What was that learning curve like? Like, how long did it take? Or like even compared to, say, designing clothing? Because that's something you have probably experienced. At least you wear clothing, and maybe that's a little bit easier jump. But designing a bike and to not be a regular rider, not eat, sleep, and live mountain biking like the rest of the industry. Like, how was that jump, that learning curve?
I think I actually looked at it more like it was a design challenge, like just a drawing challenge. Like, here's a sculpture and you have to make these lines connect, and you make them connect in a way that looks good and maybe evokes a feeling of speed. And so sometimes people ask me, like, what inspires you? Like, is there some outside source that you look at and get inspired by? And I think it's more like the feeling and the balance of, like, proportions of lines. There's something about, like, thicker lines on the bottom that make you feel sturdy, or like smooth lines that make you feel like, oh, wow, this is like water or air moving through space. So I looked at it as a process problem, and I was like, okay, I just have to get from here to there, avoid these spots, and kind of make it look more like a bike than not. Because at the time, I did a lot of research on bikes out there. And so some of the carbon frames were just so beautiful and so organic looking. And Hans had told me, he's like, I really want something that's very iconic as a bicycle, but it has to be like really cool. And so it couldn't look too conceptual. And so like some of my early drawings were just so playful and so weird. And, you know, like they didn't look like bikes at all. They, you know, they could have looked like little weird lollipops and, you know, like
the candy.
Yeah. So, I mean, it had to be tempered with something kind of down to earth. So the archetype we have of a bike in our heads, we have this like triangle shape with like two wheels. I had to just basically try to stick around that.
But still, you know, you're able to pull off that iconic look, right? Like there's no other bikes that have the same kind of shape and curves that like an Ibis does. I think it definitely is still distinctive today. People recognize them. They're definitely beautiful. Your work is beautiful.
Thank you.
And so I want to know like the feeling that I recognize that now. That's actually what you were going for. Like it's hard to kind of put that in words, or like a lot of people don't recognize that bike is saying that. But so there's also the functional part, right? Like, so when you're designing a bike, you know, now we want mountain bikers, they want everything, right? Like they want like the big wheels, the longer travel, they want their water bottle cage and like all of that stuff. They want it to be light, but they also want the stiffness. Like, how do you balance those real world constraints, those demands, right? Like everybody wants that. How do you balance that with making it still a piece of art? And
yeah, I think it's lucky that we can almost all achieve that now. It's like we've gotten to a really level playing field where a lot of us have achieved, you know, all the goals that we want. And I think that the next step, you know, like for Ibis, for example, I think we had produced our own rims because we felt like the wider rims could like lessen the amount of times our tires, you know, would burp or pop or like, you know, we would lose air. For the bike, for example, some of the designs have a few points of interest. So if there's something really technically new or interesting, I like to draw attention to those parts. And so I'll actually maybe simplify the design and like draw your eye to something interesting that's near like an eccentric or something that we've designed that's a little different than just the iconic, you know, Mojo styling, for example. So it helps also that we work with carbon fiber because it's so thin. We can like determine exactly where we need to beef up the parts of carbon and the layers. And so lightweight isn't much of a problem anymore. And, you know, we've gotten really good at figuring out how to make it look great and not compromise like weight, you know, and like what people want to run. There are some times that, you know, we want something and it's like, we need to find the right partner to do it with because it's like, oh, well, we need to change how we create our bike design. In general, like that's my goal, to make everything kind of efficient but look great.
Awesome. So since we're here like at a women's mountain bike festival, like we've got all of these size small frames and people can't see because we're talking, but you're obviously a smaller petite woman too. So what kind of considerations do you have to take into account for these smaller frames when you design bikes? Is it harder to design them for the smaller frames or is it about the same?
Usually for the extreme sizes, I would think like for small and extra large are usually more challenging than medium and large. However, sometimes when things get lower and slacker, like everything gets harder because you're trying to fit geometry and dampers and water bottles, and there's not much room because you need everything to be super slack and, you know, have tire clearance and dropper clearance and all that stuff. With the smalls, I have to be quite cognizant of like BB height, speccing correct crank lengths and bar lengths. Standover height is huge. So the amount of space you have between like your crotch and standing up, that is always top of mind. So we use a lot of our customer data to get us a lower standover. So even if we don't do a quote unquote extra small, we've captured more of that audience in our small size. So we don't make an extra small. We just make a small. And I think I had a rider today on a HD4 and she's probably like 411 and 26-inch inseam.
Oh.
And she was really surprised that we had a bike her size, because she was like, well, you don't make an extra small. That small is not going to fit. And I was like, you got to try our small. At least stand over it, see if it works. But, I think that's the thing too. Like, we need to demand that we're heard, the smaller people. And also, I think the larger people, like that are extra large, they need to demand that they get, sized correctly. And,
yeah, totally.
So
Right. And I feel like it's not just us women that are little people asking for bikes, right?
No.
There's a lot of shorter riders, and even like with the advent of Nika and all these younger riders, they're still like smaller and they need these size small frames.
Yeah, once anyone gets to 5 feet, their parents call us and they're like, get me on that bike. And, it's the resale value is great, because then they can sell it to their friends' kids. And, so there's a lot of younger people. Like, I saw, I think, 2 twins that were about 5'2" each, and they were both on like Mojo 3s.
Awesome.
Yeah, and they were just teenagers. So.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about that just a little bit more, because one of the bikes that you came out with this year recently, right, was the DV9 29er, and that was kind of inspired by, I forget who it was.
Yeah, so Hans is one of the partners, and his daughter is Nika NorCal, like just kicks ass, and she was able to work with us during the summertime, and she's been working for us. So like, from cutting down boxes to wrenching on bikes, like, she's gone through the gamut of the downstairs production, and she earned her bike.
Great. Yeah. Awesome. And so just real quick, an overview, it's a 29er, it's carbon hardtail. This probably isn't just intended for like high school young people, right? Like, who else can you see? Who else is this bike for?
I mean, I use this bike for commuting to work through the mountains and road. Like, I do a little bit of road or whatever, but I'm on the trails, and it's a great climber. Like, there's a local place called Big Basin, and they had just this crazy race through there, and everyone was on gravel bikes, but I'm like, I would take this hardtail, because I could go for hours in this flat bars and like nice fat, like, bigger wheels than a little bit fatter wheels. But it's just a great climber, and you can be on the same trails as your full suspension bike and take really playful lines, and that's something that I love about like Santa Cruz in general, and Ibis as a company. Like, we have the terrain to like play, and so sometimes if I'm stuck at work or something, I can use different bikes and have totally different experience on the same trails.
That's awesome. On the topic of new bikes, like, we saw a lot of long travel 29ers this year. Like, Ibis was maybe one of the first that came out with your Ripmo, right? It's the long travel 29er. How did you know this was like going to be the next big thing? I mean, I know this is probably, you got to rewind a couple of years, because you've probably been working on it, but how'd you know long travel 29ers are what people were going to be riding now, and what they wanted?
I think after we had the Ripley, the 29er Ripley, and then the 29er Ripley LS, we got a lot of customer feedback saying we wanted longer travel, more travel, more travel. And we listened.
Wow, that was easy. I thought there was like way more.
I mean, that's a little bit. It's a little bit, more than that. But
once you do like kind of commit to a brand, Ibis, it's nice to know that like, yeah, your voice is going to be heard. Like, you like your bike, but guess what? Next generation, can you guys improve the ride quality? Can you make it a little bit better?
And we try to make sure, like that lightweight 29er customer is heard, as well as the more heavy duty customer. So we're not going to change the Ripley to be something burlier. We're going to still make that bike and maybe improve upon it and like have different iterations, same as like any bike iteration we have. But we wanted to make something super special for the more enduro crowd, but they wanted longer, like, just more wheelbase, bigger tires, just the ability to kind of rip through things. And I think we got a lot of feedback from both customers and our EWS team.
And so what was that whole design process like? Did you just like take the Ripley and make some modifications and tweak it, or did you start from scratch, or did you even take the Mojo?
No, well, it's funny because, you know, the name isn't really, like, the name isn't like awesome clever, but Ripmo, you kind of like match the two together. It's like they had like this cool kid, you know, like the the Ripley and the Mojo got together and they're just like, yeah, we're gonna be like really progressive. And so it was actually purposefully a new looking platform. So those opportunities are kind of nestled in between huge revamps of, you know, our bike models. So those models kind of excite me because I get to do a totally different design language.
Cool. Well, so I guess in my experience, it's always like a designer's work is never done. Do you think like, is there going to be soon a new iteration of the Ripmo, or what are you working on next? Surely you're working on something. There's like at least 3 things soon and more things later. So nondescript.
I told Cerise actually yesterday, I said, yeah, you know, I don't even show my concept sketches because then I would be like giving up my life.
Okay, so I guess I'm not going to get anything. No. You're not going to lick anything.
I can't.
That's okay. I had to try. You're in Santa Cruz. What trails do you like to ride up there?
I really like stuff in Nicene Marks and SoCal Demo Forest. So there's like Braille Trails over there. In Wilder, it's really funny because I started just taking a trails building course through MBOSC, and shout out to MBOSC. They're really great. It's like a 12 course thing where you learn about trails, like every aspect of designing and building. And since I'm a designer, I'm always like thinking about things.
This is like such a different, well, not that different, but very different world.
Yeah, and you know, and like actually getting your shovel in and understanding like how hard it is to like dig out a path, you know, even a foot of trail. You have this like huge appreciation for tricks and things like that. So I think there's a huge reroute planned for some of Wilder, and I'm really excited about that. But I like riding anything, like just challenges and rock faces. And
well, let's talk just a little bit more about like trail advocacy, since we're on the topic. Like, you getting some other folks from Ibis involved in this? Is this like, or your personal thing because you're learning and at the same time you get to give back?
Yeah, I think a few of us have already gone through the course, and I know 1 or 2 people that have, I think, done it, and a lot of our employees volunteer. But you know, we have a sort of a nice camaraderie with MBOSC, and you know, not only donating bikes for raffles and stuff, but getting out there and helping to build and understanding like what they need is really cool. So since I'm a designer, like I get into like the observational research, and this is my observational research mode, and then I'm getting into like what's actually happening. So seeing the amount of energy through volunteers is amazing, because almost everyone that's working on the trails are volunteers. And so for the most part, it's like cyclists are making trails like for everyone.
Yeah.
And it's really cool because, you know, like the Venn diagram of like, okay, who are hikers and who are mountain bikers? And when they overlap, it's like, oh my God, almost all mountain bikers are hikers. And so we are just like out there, and I think it's in our, like, we like dirt.
That's right. If we're not riding it, we're shoveling it, or we should be.
Yeah.
We should be, right? Like, I mean, even if you don't know how, right? Like, you don't have to know, you just personally want to know the ins and outs of trail building, but like anybody can get out there and help maintain the trails, and we should be, right? We should be, right? The magic trail fairies don't just clean the stuff up overnight and make new trails appear, and everyone else gets to ride them. And there's also something to be said, right, of like earning that ride, right? You're going to enjoy it way more if you like put some of your own blood, sweat, and tears. Maybe not that much blood, sweat. I mean,
I give probably sweat, blood, and probably like poison oak.
And poison.
My
and you
my
got
skin,
poison
and
oak,
I got
and
poison
it gave
oak.
you poison oak.
It's okay.
That happens. Oh, so which bike do you ride primarily? What's your favorite child? Your favorite bike?
Oh,
I know it must be so hard. It's like picking a favorite child, but you can't.
Probably right now the Ripmo is my favorite bike. My second favorite is probably the Haka MX, but that one is
the gravel bike.
Yeah, and I run it 27.5, so it's like a little kind of traily bike. Yeah, and I just like climbing on it. Just so the difference between the Ripmo and the Haka MX are so extreme that it just blows my mind the times I ride, because I'm like, it's so different, and I just get this experience and this experience. Like I could ride the same trail and it's so much more faster or different, or I can take things differently. It's just fun no matter what.
Awesome. And so your Ripmo, is it customized at all, or is it like one of the same builds? Anyone?
Yeah, it's I probably run not like the double barrel damper on it, so it's a little bit lighter weight, and I do run like 165 cranks, so yeah, a little bit small.
Those I may have to try that on.
Yeah, those are nice, and nothing really different. I try to have the same setup, like with my geometry. Like when you get fitted and you don't fit a bike, then you hurt yourself.
Yes,
you get injuries,
feel good.
Right? So I don't deviate too much from actually the.
Okay. And the Roxy tune, is that like, do you actually have the Roxy tune?
Well, that's only on the, I only had that on the Mojo.
Okay.
That was the I didn't take things so hard on that bike. It was like an all trail bike. So the Roxy tune was specifically because that damper came with like a minimum weight of like 140.
Oh, yeah.
So no one can ride that under 140. And that was men and women. I would go through our list of data, and even on medium frames or small frames, sometimes people were, 135 men and women, so or less. So I was like, there's no reason why we can't just have this as a pre-tuned, damper as an option, because you have the option, of course, to send it into Fox. But when you get something out of the box, you kind of want to ride it.
You want it.
You don't want to take it apart.
And it makes a big difference, because I remember back in the day, just buying an off-the-shelf fork, and it's tuned for that 150-pound dude, and I'm 100 pounds some change, and and I can just get a little bit out of that shock. You want that whole thing to work.
Yeah,
so
and
I'm glad that you offer that. That's cool.
Yeah, you feel like you didn't, you didn't get your money's worth somehow.
Aw, yes, and that would be a shame, because we all know bikes cost a lot of money these days, and I know you certainly get what you pay for when you get an Ibis. They're all nice machines, very well designed.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time, Roxy. It's good having you.
Thank you so much.
If you want to keep up with Roxy and Ibis and their newest bikes, head over to ibiscycles.com or follow them on Instagram at ibiscycles. We hope you've been enjoying the podcast. We have tons of great content for you. If you head over to singletracks.com and sign up for the email newsletter, that's the best way to keep up with the newest mountain bike news. That's all we have for today. We'll catch you again next week with another new episode. Peace.